Welcome, everyone. What was the best part of your workshop this morning? Anybody want to raise their hand and say something you learned this morning from your workshop? It's always the first person that breaks the ice. Go ahead. Okay, setting up advanced segments in analytics. What else did we learn today? Something you can take back to the dealership. Go ahead. Okay, so a better focus on mobile marketing and mobile websites. What else? Feedback, go ahead.
Focus on actionable data.
Okay, to train your eyes to focus on actionable data. Awesome. Anything else? Something you learned from your workshop. Go ahead. SEO videos, right? How that plays part in your search. Anybody else? Go ahead. Okay, great. So I'm really pleased to be on stage with Chris, and I'll tell you a little background of why I was so impressed is because I love data. Chris and I are analytics junkies, and I visited Seattle, where Cobalt's offices are, and I never really knew how big of a data warehouse Cobalt has. Their unique position in the industry, working with General Motors and other OEMs, but General Motors in specific, being able to see the behavior of consumers on Tier 1, the OEM site, Tier 2, regional advertising, Tier 3. And I didn't realize how slick these guys were in actionable data. Who mentioned actionable data? Okay. Cobalt really impressed me, not on the volume of data, but how they could help OEMs and dealers be more successful. And Chris, there's something going on behind us here, and people have no idea what that is. So tell us what we're watching.
So this is real-time traffic. This is paid search, organic search, vehicle detail page views, display advertising clicks. Behind each one of those boxes is about between 500 and 1,500 advertising impressions, but these are just the clicks from those advertising impressions, across a network of 8,000 dealerships and about 1,000 Tier 2 sites. So if you're in this room and you know who has a Cobalt site and enter a search term, you would see this show up here in 2 or 3 seconds. So it gives you an idea of just the reign of opportunity that happens through the internet down into your dealerships.
We were actually in the Cobalt office, and they said, Brian, go do a search. And we just picked the search, and boom, the keyword showed instantly. So when you have real-time data, seeing the consumer journey from Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, you can understand how much data that is. And today we'd like to walk you through some of the latest research and findings that Cobalt has done, and my job is to hold Chris accountable and really make it actionable for you here at this conference. So Chris, let's dive into the presentation.
Well, I have an unusual start in that I'm going to spend the first few minutes telling you why you shouldn't believe me and some of the hazards of big data. So let me get the presentation up here.
And Chris, put your mic up just a little higher, so if you turn your head, there we go.
So I want to share different sources of information that you can use to evaluate what consumers are doing in your store, and then have a series of conversations with Brian about different insights that we have gleaned from our data warehouse. This is the first time we're revealing some of these insights, and so I think there's lots to discuss and lots to argue about their interpretation. And then finally talk a little bit about how this information can be applied in the future to actually improve the performance of your stores. So first of all, I'd like to start with a slide that many of you I think have seen. Brian, you've used this in some of your presentations. And I think we can all accept today that digital is a critical part of the old consumer buying process. You heard me talk yesterday about the reduction of number of dealerships visited over the course of the last 5 to 10 years. A lot of that's done because much of the shopping behavior, much of the brand preference is now being established in online, long before that shopper physically shows up at your store. And Google has shown through their research that those online influences actually become the dominant influences in that buying process.
and for the first time, you may not be able to see all those numbers, but for the first time since Google's been tracking, the dealership visit is not the #1 influencing medium. The dealership website and the OEM website moved ahead, even though slightly, meaning that the reason why the number of those showroom visits have dropped, which Amit from DealerTrack showed yesterday, was that they're really getting a lot more rich information from the dealership website today that's narrowing down their choices.
But again, here's one of my cautions. Now, this chart is showing utilization of different forms of information by the consumer. It doesn't talk about their relative influence. Other Google research, including the original ZMOD research from Shopper Science, says when you ask the consumers what has the most influence on your purchase, the test drive still is the most important influence.
Yes, absolutely.
So here's my big caution about some of the numbers I'm about to show you. It's really mesmerizing to see all that data go by and see consumers interact with the clicks, but we have a partial view into that consumer's behavior. In the end, we're trying to measure what goes on inside someone's head, and we have no direct instruments to go and know exactly what you were thinking at one time, thank goodness. All we have to work with is how you interact with content on the internet. We don't know the conversations you have offline with your friends. We don't know which TV advertisements you are viewing. There's much we don't know in this process, and you should always have that caution as we look at this big data of how much we know, and how much the data is telling us, and how much we don't know.
Yeah, and you've seen this if you work at a dealership that's still heavily traditional, spending to say, listen, Brian, when we do an event sale or a tent sale, people come in, and the only way we're doing it is through a local radio or TV push. We're not saying that traditional or other influence is not important. But if we have some insights from big data that we can apply, then we shouldn't ignore it.
Yeah, and I can give you one very topical example. We have several of our clients, OEM clients, advertising the Super Bowl. Well, you can imagine with that kind of insight around real-time shopper behavior, we know how consumers are reacting to those advertisements. Now, many manufacturers don't even have the concept of the fact that there'd be action on dealership websites in response to a brand advertisement on the Super Bowl. Everyone's watching the game, right? Well, as we all know, and I'm sure many of us are sitting watching the Super Bowl with an iPad on our lap. And it turns out there's a very material impact on dealership traffic. The models advertised on the Super Bowl increased, the traffic increased over the baseline time frame by over 500% during the game, and had a persistent increase in traffic of about 60% for the 4 hours after the game. So with wide variation by advertisement, some as low as 11% lift, some as high as 1,300% lift. So we provide those kind of insights to the OEM to say what advertising at the national level is most effective in creating shopper interest as manifest by dealer interaction. So there are many paths to the truth here, and I want to share just some of the different sources that you can look at and rely on. I've picked a selection of sources for this presentation, not just Cobalt Research, because different vendors have different insights and vantage points on the consumer. And if you look across the whole shopping process, we have to have awareness of content being served, manufacturer websites, regional websites, third-party marketplaces, and dealership websites just on the online space. And no one vendor, including Cobalt, has universal visibility into all those sources. So I'll share a little bit about what the sources are best for what kind of insights. But let me just pick another cautionary tale here. Compete is a very credible organization that has an exceptional breadth of visibility into web traffic in general, and they're a source used by Google in a lot of their research. But if you look at Compete's information, they report that dealerships in aggregate only have about 1/4 the traffic as the OEM, the manufacturer Tier 1 sites. Well, we have a series of networks where we measure traffic both at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So we know all of the dealers in that network, obviously. We're informed of that by the manufacturer. And what we see is the aggregate dealer traffic is actually significantly higher than the OEM Tier 1 traffic, and that pattern has been trending up over time. So here's a case where two different views on the same piece of information, but radically different outcomes.
And Chris, why would you think that Compete's data would have really such a different viewpoint in favor of the OEM?
So the simplest answer to this, and I don't have a direct answer from Compete, is just that Compete has an incomplete database of knowing which URLs are associated with dealers. It's
Right.
a very hard thing to track.
Right, so if they just went from a GM dealer list, but their primary website, they decided to go off-brand, Compete wouldn't know that.
That's correct.
Okay, and that's important to understand when you're taking these big data decisions down to your dealership, is you need to really understand how that data was formed. And in this particular case, since you see Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, I would say your data would be much more accurate.
And frankly, it gives you, this specific insight that we provide our OEM clients gives you incredible power. When those Tier 1 agencies listen to us say that the dealers collectively have more traffic than their Tier 1 site, all of a sudden they care a hell of a lot more about driving traffic to your websites. And we've seen OEMs with this information shift a significant portion of their Tier 1 dollars to drive direct response kinds of advertising to your stores and away from national brand advertising. So here's just maybe a bit of an eye chart, but some of the sources that I respect and think have interesting perspectives on this question of big data. So just going from the top very briefly here, and I'll refer you to the individual vendors to probably better represent their capabilities. But AutoTrader is an excellent source for used traffic and cross-brand shopping insights on autotrader.com. And they bring some visibility through their VIN systems acquisition into downstream behavior, into shoppers leaving AutoTrader, going to VIN Solutions dealerships. And they have good volume, especially with used vehicle shoppers. Their limitations, and all of us have limitations, is around visibility into new shopping behavior. And as you'll see through some of the insights I share later, it's really very valuable to know not just the URL shoppers are going to, but the actual content they're interacting with on the website. Is it a vehicle details page view? Is it an hours and directions view? Is it a staff page? All that information, that visibility into content gives you a lot of insight into what specific actions are changing, modifying consumer intent.
And Chris, to clarify that, to bring it down to a clear thought, is that if you're the website provider, you know that URL is associated with a specials page or a contact us page. Google Analytics, right, just reports URL, not intent or the purpose of the page. Mm-hmm. And it's really important to understand that, because remember what if you were in my class, I said bounce rate in itself means nothing unless you look at what the purpose of the page was, what the context of that message is, and that is an advantage of sitting with Enterprise Analytics and owning the website platform. You get both traffic and intent.
Correct. Good. So if you look at Compete, we just talked about them briefly. Compete is a great source for a holistic market view of traffic with the limitations we just identified around just understanding what's the actual mapping of those individual URLs. But they also, in addition to their broad network traffic, they manage a fairly good-sized panel of consumers. At any one time, some percentage, I think what the number is 4 or 5% of those consumers will be in market for a car. And so they can actually track all the places those individual consumers go in their shopping journey. Now, again, 4 to 5% of 200,000 shoppers isn't that much in aggregate, but still gives you very useful insights into the holistic number of sites and types of sites that consumers go to. Dadium has built a nice position around working with dealers and supporting dealer groups, giving you cross-brand, cross-website platform visibility, into traffic, giving them good value. They're building attribution models, which I think will be a future we talk about. But they have little or no Tier 1 and Tier 2 visibility, and in some cases, they're excluded from significant number OEM networks from content. So that's good in where they have that cross-brand visibility, less visibility, up and down the tiers. Shopper Sciences is actually a research partner of Google and contributed to a lot of the original ZMOT work, and has some very interesting insights using entirely different methodology. They actually strap electrodes to people's heads and watch them go through the store in a shopping process to understand where people get stressed out in the shopping process. And you'll see, I'll use one slide that Google used from Shopper Sciences about the role of the dealer website in the process. But that's a very unique perspective. They're actually doing biometric analysis of how shoppers are interacting, as they go through the buying process, and what are the sources of psychological friction, if you will, to that sale. But they're dealing with a sample size of 500 in doing that.
It'd be very interesting to see the neurological pattern of a consumer going into a one-price dealership versus a typical negotiation. That would be interesting to see what people's brain waves, if they were less stressed. That would be really interesting to know.
And Google, we all know Google's strengths around just sheer breadth and volume in understanding search behavior. But they also have built very strong research partners with people like Shopper Sciences, with Compete and others, and a good source of aggregate information of shopper behavior and, of course, looking across brand. Their limitations, like any global cross-industry vendor, is their amount of focus on automotive specifically and some of the full breadth, the full marketing mix used in automotive. But in their area, they're really pretty hard to beat. And finally, some of our strengths as an organization are a big network. Over 8,000 dealers use our websites. That gives us very high volume. We, for most of our, not most, but in terms of volume of our networks, we actually have tagging from the OEM site to the regional sites down to the dealer site. So we can see cross-tier shopping behavior. And we have data partnerships with third-party marketplaces, and as well as using ad networks such as Google to give us broad visibility into advertising attribution. I think one of our unique assets is closed-loop analysis. We can identify, and I'll show you some data on this, which shoppers have actually closed and bought a car, and tie that back to an online shopping behavior. Not 100%, but sufficiently for us to know which shopping behaviors are best correlated with purchase because of our membership of the ADP organization and connection to the DMS. Our limitations are that we have lots of depth in the brands that we support, 10 brands, much less visibility outside of those brands.
And I think, Chris, is what's important to understand, and the reason why some of this research is really important is, even though Chris mentioned, I want to reinforce it. And the reinforcement point is, if your ability to tag consumers along their journey, and then you have access to the DMS and can tie that back because they called or because they submitted a lead or some other ways, the data here is that closed loop analysis is really important. And I can't encourage you enough that because of that closed loop analysis and the depth of that data discovery is why we're on stage and sharing some of this data, because it's not pie in the sky approximations. It's really, what did we learn that could change your digital marketing strategy, your merchandising strategy for 2013?
So just a last sort of plug about our capabilities. You saw it visually up there earlier. But we see every hour 37,000 vehicle detail page views. Every day we track over 1 million shoppers. Every week we monitor website activity of about 5 million visitors. Every month we serve 1 billion ad impressions. And every year we observe over 500 million vehicle inventory searches. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've built a team of 70 dedicated data scientists and researchers that to do both descriptive analytics, describing what has happened, qualitative analytics of why it happened, and the big focus we have right now is predictive analytics. What will happen to influence your decisions around how you stock inventory, how you price inventory, where you advertise. And that, frankly, is where a bulk of the value from analytics will come when it moves into the predictive realm.
Right, and we talked about this earlier, and I'll say it again. Big data without actionable data is meaningless. We need to really understand how to consolidate all its information into actionable things that you could do at your dealership, and some of the things that Chris is going to share is exactly that focus.
So that's what I shared earlier, and let's just go into some of the data dialogue. So what knowledge do we have here about what are the consumers' online experience today? So I'm going to move to the podium at this point and show you what some real consumers, real anonymous consumers, have done.
And when I saw this tool up in Seattle, I was like, wow. imagine being able to look at a specific consumer and see every click they took. The thing that was really amazing to me was how important retargeting and display advertising was during that journey. And being able to see that it's not a straight path, to see how many different media types and sites they visited. And I know the graphics may not be easy for you to read, but Chris will walk you through. This is the level of granularity Cobalt's data tools have to see effectively what is working in any market for any brand.
Super. Thanks, Brian. And I have to be clear, we're still in this phase of trying to understand what these consumer behaviors are. Mark Twain once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Consumers don't repeat themselves, but they do rhyme. And we're trying to, right now, a lot of our research is trying to understand in what ways are consumers showing similar behaviors that then become actionable programmatically, in advertising and website content execution. But I'll give you just a couple examples so you have a sense for what we see online around shoppers. So this is one shopper that actually had well over 300 interactions, online interactions, in the course of roughly a 3-month shopping process. This actual shopping process, to the best of our knowledge, was triggered by a non-Cobalt interaction. It was actually a lifecycle email generated through the GM program on the first day, and that's the first time we had visibility. Again, we track many things that we don't actually deliver ourselves. That in turn triggered a visit to a dealership website and the GM regional website, which caused that visitor to be tagged by both sides and then become a target for advertising, especially retargeting advertising. And you see, in this particular shopper, we can see some interesting patterns of behavior. We see a period that we first see as dealer outreach, when that shopper, and what we're seeing here at the top of the bars here is the aggregate number of online interactions that consumer is experiencing through their shopping process through different vehicles, different advertising vehicles, with the blue being Cobalt retargeting ads, the orange being GM lifecycle advertising, MSN paid search. One interesting thing you'll see about this shopper is we're an MSN user, a search user, not a Google user. Actually, there's no Google interactions in this whole journey. So again, every consumer is different.
So Chris, any time in that journey where there's a blue, they interacted with some type of retargeting?
Correct.
Does that wake you up? How many people honestly are not doing retargeting here in the room? We're not doing retargeting. A couple? Note to self. In this 3-month life cycle, retargeting brought them back into the game, into the dealer or OEM brand, significant, low cost, probably the most cost-effective advertising, I think. Chris, I don't know what Cobalt's position is, but I mean, when we look through, anonymous consumer after anonymous consumer, after 3 or 4, I just said, check, retargeting 100% has to be in your budget.
Yeah, once that consumer has visited your store and started looking at individual inventory, don't you want to reinforce that intent, that interest expressed in your store? And one thing I'll share a little bit later is the standard models that say that consumers only visit dealer websites at the end of the shopping process are dead wrong. And you'll see through these journeys how they're dead wrong and why you can take advantage of it. So in this particular journey, we sort of broken it down into 4 phases. We see initial phase of sort of light interest, but during that light interest and research, this shopper is visiting dealer websites every 2 or 3 days, but constantly being reinforced with retargeting exposures. Then it then goes into what we call a dormant phase. It's hard to see that because the axes reduce here, but from a peak of about 30 or 40 impressions and interactions a day, it drops down into the low single digits for most of this period. And several of those are sort of emails to keep in touch with them. But then toward the end of the period, we start to see an increase in activity for that dealership. And this is a view that an individual dealer would see of interaction with their shopper. This shopper, we can just tell from their behavior, looked at this particular dealership as their home dealership. They responded to an owner marketing email, and so this is the interaction that dealership is having with their customer. Then the shopper goes into a more active phase of research, visiting more websites, doing more inventory searches. And at the bottom right here, we also start to see more diversity of models looked at. The very first model this consumer looked at was a Yukon, I believe, a GMC Yukon. And we see him starting to dabble here with Cadillacs and other models in the shopping process, examining alternatives. And then finally we go into a purchase phase where this shopper stops interacting online entirely. He goes quiet, isn't going to dealership websites, isn't interacting with advertising, and now looking backward, makes a purchase 4 days later. Now we intuit from this behavior that these 4 days over Thanksgiving, this shopper was in the stores, making the purchase decision. And the end, we think it in no small part because the home dealership stayed in front of them with retargeting and other advertising. They purchased, in this case, a Yukon XL, at the home dealership. So that's the dealership view. It's a happy story, a loyal customer coming back to that dealership. But if you take a broader view of all the behavior that shopper had, you see that shopper actually looked, if you look down here at this down here at the bottom, this shopper actually went to, I think it's 9 or 10 different dealerships. This is the home dealership, and you see down here in the bottom left the interactions that are associated with that dealership. But as you go back and forth here, you see other dealerships interacting with that shopper. You could argue that this GMC center almost snagged this shopper given the volume of interactions several days back before the purchase. And you just see that real life is far more complicated than what you see from your dealer analytics, and if you have a cross-dealership view of that shopper. So if I can give you just a couple of just very other quick views of some other consumers. Let me look at, again, all these names are all bogus. They're all anonymous shoppers. But not all shopping processes are 2 months long. Here's one that's only 10 days. Here's a shopper that really didn't look at any other makes and models than Hyundai Santa Fe's. They ultimately went back and bought a car from Boucher Chevrolet, in this case. But they played the field very actively. You see here on November 4th, they were very active in market, going to, in a single day, 4 or 5 dealerships, possibly looking for the best price. And there's just another pattern of shopper behavior, for example. We go to another shopper. We see a 60-day cycle of purchase. That you see there's a period of time in that journey where there's really intense shopper behavior, shopper interaction here around November 20th and 21st. You can say, with some certainty, they made up their mind, their final decision around the make model on that date. If you look at these bubbles here, the quantity and length of time on vehicle details pages. So the size of the bubble is the amount of time spent. Almost 500 seconds on a vehicle details page is a long time. But at the same time, they were actively looking at the Equinox. Ultimately, the shopper bought the Equinox. But you can tell which vehicles they're actively considering, and they bought the vehicle on the 23rd here. But again, in this case, far fewer interactions, only about 200 online impressions over a shorter window of time. But you can see how you start to say, what kind of actions can I take on this information? And the last one I'll show you here is just another shopper where this shopper was originally went to a tier 2 site, had a 17-day journey, but in that journey actually visited 20 different dealerships. Now again, with real intensity here on this date, November 3rd in this case, with over 25 different dealer website visits. But again, you see, to Brian's point, because early on they visited a regional site and a dealer website, there was a consistent reinforcement of intent. And yes, the original site they visited with that reinforcement was the site they ultimately purchased. Though in that process, they changed their initial interest in a Silverado HD to a Sierra 2500 HD, and that's what they actually bought. So you start to see, with this kind of insight into how consumers are looking, which media they're interacting with, what kind of vehicles they're considering, you can take dynamic action and present content that's relevant to them in their shopping process. Brian, I think just last week, you wrote a note about how if we know that the consumer has looked at a certain model early in the shopping process, we can actually, through display advertising, present that inventory to them, as they surf the web, and give them a chance to click directly through to the vehicle detail page on your dealership website.
Has anybody seen, I mean, I wrote about this, and I'm sure all of you are reading everything I write the same day or hour, but have you been followed around the internet with dynamic banners outside of cars? Anybody see that outside of cars? What followed you? Skiing? Okay. Okay. What else? Who else got? Amazon, right? It started about a month or two ago to register with me. I was looking at specific things on Guitar Center, like Pioneer CDJ 2000 for Connor, since he got his good grades. And here were the banners, the mixer, the actual, products I looked at. Macy's, Martha Stewart, cast iron, orange, because I like orange, pots. And I looked at an orange one, a red one, and some other accessories, and there was this banner with all three products, and it was crazy.
My question is, how far in depth and personal is the product you get? Do you have individual retargeting, remarketing campaigns down to the model? What do you call it around by a yellow pot or a red pot?
Right, so it actually followed me on the exact pot that I specifically selected, which was the orange pot, because I clicked on, and then I saw that Cobalt was following people, with specific cars. So if they viewed 3 VDPs, the banner had those 3 cars. And I'm like, wow, like this is really, really cool stuff that if you saw how important the blue bar was across the journey, wouldn't it be cool if those, and the fact that the consumer comes back a couple times, that you could reset a relevant inventory-based message. That is what I think we're heading towards, more relevant advertising that connects with people in the journey.
That's very right. Any other questions or comments about?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I was visiting Pohanka the other day. I was there doing a demo on site. I visited some cars on Cars.com, and Cars.com had Pohanka cars following me, the specific VDPs that I viewed. They still have email? Oh, just kidding, just kidding. Yes, that's retargeting. That's retargeting. They're doing it on behalf of the dealers as part of a marketing program.
Okay. So the next insight I wanted to share with you is that not all media channels are alike. Different media channels actually have access different demographics that you can potentially use in your targeting and your digital advertising. So again, looking across millions of different consumers, I'm afraid this is a bit of an eye chart on this screen. But we look at different types of media. You see here in the upper left there, read this axis here. On the vertical axis is age. On the bottom of the chart is an average age of 40. The top of the chart is an average age of 60. On the horizontal axis is the average wealth of a household, with the left axis being $50,000, the right axis being $100,000. And so what you see there is search right there in the middle of distribution. Shoppers responding and interacting with stores via email are actually both a richer and surprisingly a younger demographic than the average search shoppers. And then you can bring out, if you look at different search products, you see there's a different demographic portfolio for each of the different search providers. With some of the firms like AOL, surprise, surprise, being actually about the same in terms of age, but substantially wealthier on average than the average Google shopper. Comcast has a similar regime. Other search providers have a different demographic distribution, but in general skewing wealthier than the average that Google has. Now, obviously you have limited inventory on those providers, but they may have favorable demographics depending on what your dealership sells. If you look at the right-hand side, and this is a little harder to target because people have their email addresses, this is saying just when you get a response from this email provider, how are the demographics different? And you see a tighter band, but you do see some differences with Comcast folks with Comcast emails having better demographics. Probably what's most interesting and actionable is what's there on the bottom left, where we're looking at other kinds of property where, as you'd expect, Facebook skews youthful and relatively less affluent. And actually the OEM sites skew high in wealth, but with, in the case of such the tier 2 sites, higher demographics. And you see that different other properties have different demographic profiles. So with these kind of insights, it's possible now to do some targeting. And actually, frankly, what I was not able to bring to this conference that I think is even more interesting is when you go into different ad networks and different media properties, you see even more diversity of demographics, and that's the kind of targeting that our advertising experts can do for you at a dealership level.
And the actionable thought here is that big data and analyzing these networks and response rates, your advertising partners should be coming to you with not only a paid strategy, but some information on how the network options you have in your local market skew demographic. If you're a Highline store and you can target more affluent people, instead of just saying, I just want to do display, the conversation has to start evolving in your strategy is what granular targeting can I do in my market based on the advertising channels that are available to me.
Correct. All right, so the next conversation we want to have is around what really happens at tier 2 regional sites. There's actually, as I'll share in a second, a lot of different philosophies about the role of tier 2. But when you look at, historically, again, our experience at Cobalt, we see these kind of behaviors at tier 2. And again, they were somewhat counterintuitive to us when we actually saw the data. So you think about, again, the traditional, the common wisdom, if you will, was that a shopper would start off at an OEM site, research, makes and models, do the configurator, then maybe, cross-shop at a marketplace site, then decide and try to determine, if they didn't know already, what dealers were in their local market, then go down to the dealership. It isn't quite that linear. And you see that behavior here, on the actual where shoppers go from the tier 2 sites. And so good news is that, yes, Cobalt's philosophy is the primary purpose of a tier 2 site is to directly connect a shopper with a dealership. And fortunately, that is the largest traffic flow out of the tier 2 sites. But we see a pretty diverse set of behaviors where some shoppers are going back up to the OEM site from the tier 2 site because they're looking for additional information at the tier 1 level. Some are exiting to go to other OEMs. Some are going to marketplaces, some are going to review sites, some are going to classified sites like Craigslist. So it's a very diverse, the key insight we have from this is how diverse that behavior is. And I think it's a strategy choice that one can have as a manufacturer and their dealer network about what philosophy you want to have for that tier 2 website. Again, I say, Cobalt's philosophy is has been very much to make the tier 2 sites a rapid transition to the dealership website. Our philosophy is the more rapidly you connect a shopper with a dealership, and the more rapidly you connect a shopper with an individual piece of inventory on your lot, the higher the conversion rate you will have. And I will say, we actually recently made that transition in our tier 2 programs, and we've seen about a 50% increase in VDP, vehicle detail page views, from the tier 2 sites by making the tier 2 site have dealership inventory aggregated and visible at tier 2. But Toyota and other manufacturers almost treat the tier 2 site as a mini tier 1 site and a destination with lots of content. And that has its pros and minuses. That, again, we don't share that philosophy, but it is an alternate philosophy that you can have at tier 2. And I think big data is now starting to give you some perspectives on which is going to be most effective in bringing opportunity and ultimately selling more cars.
And Chris, the OEM's tier 2 strategy that started to add inventory at the tier 2 level, are you free to say which OEM made
it will
that
be
decision?
available for most of our partners, but it started with General Motors.
Okay, right, super.
So I think a topic near and dear to all of our hearts, what drives conversion. Indeed, Brian's been preaching some of what I'll share here for a while. But I want to sort of share one philosophy we have around this issue is that we encourage you philosophically to think about the consumer and what the consumer is trying to accomplish. What's the task they are trying to do when they come to your website? If you can serve that task, you will get the up, is the basic message I have here. The data we have to support this is that we provide on dealers that authorize us to do this, a very infrequent pop-up survey to ask dealer intent when they enter the dealership website, ask consumers a short list of questions when they enter the dealership website, and a short list of questions when they exit, which gives us indications around how successful, the consumers give us feedback about how successful they were on their visit to the dealer website in achieving their task. And we asked them a couple of ways to rate this. Were you able to complete the task you came to do at the dealership website on a simple yes, partial no? But we also asked them to rate their total experience on a 0 to 10 scale. If you correlate those answers with the show rate for that consumer, the likelihood that consumer is to actually show at your dealership, you see a very tight correlation. If the consumer is able to complete their task, we predict a 50 or 60% the show rate of that online shopper to your store. If they say no, they weren't able to complete their task because you didn't have the inventory they were looking for or the finance information they were looking for, that could drop to 10% or less.
So Chris, building off what Amit said yesterday, is this saying that the dealership websites that are well merchandised, providing the most richest information and being as transparent as possible to answer their questions, the benefit is not that you're giving away information from a cross-competitive standpoint, which were some concerns yesterday, but it's actually driving more showroom appointments?
Yes, we strongly believe that.
Okay, so the data here from your warehouse and your surveys are saying more transparency, more disclosure, so dealers who are not providing pricing online would be seeing a significantly less show rate.
Yeah, so you look back at those shopper journeys we talked about. All those shoppers visited a significant number of dealerships, some as many as 20. They were going to try to solve different tasks on those dealership websites. Which dealerships do they go to? I'd argue it was the ones which addressed the tasks they had in mind. And those, again, think from the consumer point of view. What are the tasks they're trying to do? Is that vehicle on your lot? What's the best price I can get? Will you treat me fairly? Should I purchase this or lease this? These are just examples. But try to think in the consumer's language what they're trying to accomplish, and does your site enable them to fulfill those tasks? And with that orientation, I think you're going to have the best outcomes.
Okay.
And this is probably the most, I think, one of the most actionable insights that we've had as an industry over the last 6 to 12 months. I know Brian's a passionate believer of that. Is we can move past now looking at the generic measures of total number of visits, bounce rates, clicks, even web form lead submission, in terms of valuing the efficacy of our online marketing. This is the results of a closed-loop analysis of which on-site web behaviors were best correlated with actual vehicle sales. And what we see is, you see at the top of the list there is time on vehicle, total amount of time viewing vehicle detail pages, and the total number of vehicle detail views stand way above all the other measures, including total visitors, form submission rates, inventory searches.
And
yes.
yes. So those of you who are in my analytics, a little repeat here, the majority obviously weren't. How many of you look at analytics once a month? I look at my Google Analytics once a month or website analytics once a month. Okay, this is a really shabby crowd. So I guess I had all the analytics folks. People are telling me, Brian, I look at analytics, but I don't have actionable data. What am I supposed to do with that? Or it's more overwhelming. We don't do like the big song and dance with lights and fireworks, but this slide is the money slide. You can now use your data which represents the majority of the cars you sell, the stealth shoppers, the people who don't submit leads or call you. 65 to 70%, depending on what you want to say, do not contact you. The VDP views you can see. So just like you hold accountable, say Cars.com and Auto Trader, for example, how many VDP views? Oh, let me look cost for VDP. My challenge to all of you is, what's your cost per VDP on your marketing budget to your website? We now, with this research, can align our inspection. We don't care about total visits. Look at the total visits ability to predict sales at the bottom. It doesn't make a difference if you had 5,000, 10,000, or 20,000 visits to your website. But for the first time, you can chart your VDP views. If your marketing budget is continually working to sell more cars, what should be happening? The VDP views should be going up. This is really profound because dealers are frustrated. They see 10,000 visitors on their website and it's like, how come I'm not getting 10,000 people to call and submit leads? But if this is the case, Chris, what could Cobalt do with this data? Can they alert dealers about vehicles that don't have high number of VDPs? I mean, wouldn't you want to know, right? We don't have that today. If you had your website and you have 300 cars, if VDPs relate to sales, wouldn't you want to know if certain cars are under trend? Would you agree? So Chris, what can we do with this data?
Yeah, so this is a subject of research we're doing right now, is where it should be possible, we see, this is stretching the current state of the research a little bit, but predicting when a vehicle will sell based on the volume of vehicle detail page views. We're trying to understand the correlations and the variables in that right now, but based on that you can predict when a vehicle is likely to sell. And again, if you're trending below line, then you can take actions to get more vehicle detail page views, which is not just simply merchandising on your website, but it's, as we talked earlier, about presenting inventory and retargeting, using third-party marketplace sites to get visibility for that inventory. And so you can take advertising actions to drive up more views to your site. And do that early on in the shop. Within the first week you have a vehicle on your lot, not wait for it to hang out there for a couple months.
Do you understand the beauty of that strategy? I want you to think about that. If you have 200, 300, 400 cars in a lot, in her research over millions of clicks and data points is that the more VDP views you get to your own website, the more cars you sell. The more you can syndicate your inventory on third-party classifieds to get more VDP views, you'll sell more cars. But if cars are sick for some reason and they're not getting those VDP views, wouldn't you want to know about it in advance before you have to wholesale the car? Clear? This is one of the benefits of big data. This is why I was so excited. Today, you can go into Google Analytics and start looking at your VDP view trends. We don't have the ability because Google doesn't know the ownership of the website. He who owns the website can do these diagnostic tools. That's not a Google Analytics function. But if a car was low on VDP views, what could be wrong with it? Price. What else? What's that? Pictures, merchandising, right? Descriptions, and what's that? Right? Mm-hmm. So all of those things and tools like vAuto and others who have work on pricing, this is another whole level. They don't necessarily have VDP view data per vehicle, but the Cobalts of the world do. We are entering, I think in the next year, we're going to start to see the application of big data in a tactical level that you will be able to use to sell more cars. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a key indicator because you've been looking at these 10,000 views or 5,000 views to your website and saying, what the hell am I supposed to do with this data? And the answer is nothing. It really doesn't help you sell more cars. But if you filter out and say, let me just look at the VDP views, how's that trending? How is my paid search driving VDP views? How's my display driving VDP views? Guess what? You'll sell more cars.
And this is applicable not just the dealership level, but also the manufacturer level, as you might guess. We're able to predict the future sales volume of a model at about 95% accuracy, about 6 to 8 weeks out. So you can imagine the imports, for example, are pretty interested in that. That helps them inform where they ship their cars, which port to ship it to. Other manufacturers say, well, this, if I know I'm going to have a supply-demand imbalance in the Mountain West, for example, do I put incentives there to help help move that inventory, or do I adjust manufacturing capacity? So we're moving into a world where this data is going to allow us to be much more efficient in our manufacturing operations processes as well as our marketing practices.
Actionable step, write down, start to look at your VDP views on your website, looking at your VDP views on your third party, get some eyeballs on that data. It's that important.
So the last topic I just want to talk about is the topic of brand. And so our manufacturers collectively spend about $8 billion on national advertising. The question is, what does that buy? I think both Brian and I had our eyes opened with this. I think this data came from Google. What's the source there? It's actually the Compete Vehicle Cross-Shopping Analysis, that about 60% of shoppers enter the marketplace with a specific make and model in mind, that they're saying, I'm going to buy this make model. But only 20% of those shoppers ultimately end up buying the model they originally intended to buy. So, wow, that doesn't say much for that $8 billion just bought that initial entry into the marketplace, that initial brand intent and interest. Along the way, 2/3 of those shoppers were conquested away, or just were better informed about their choices through the process in getting to the purchase phase. And that happens on the internet. That happens on your websites, third-party marketplaces, review sites, and the like. And so enormous value is created and destroyed between that $8 billion in manufacturer spend and that purchase on the store.
Let's take this to your store. If 63% of consumers go into the market looking to buy a vehicle, and let's just say you're a Toyota dealer, they have a brand intent, but only 20% of them are going to buy for you. Wake-up call. If you do not differentiate yourself, educate yourself, provide the information to help them complete their task, they will move to another brand. If you're the Honda store, or I've heard recently, a Ford dealer say, man, Chrysler's been doing a great job, advertising, Ford, is behind. I said, well, forget about that. What are you doing in your local market? If only 20% of the people who are going to buy a Chrysler end up buying a Chrysler, Ford dealer, what are you doing to educate the consumer why the F-150 is better than the Ram, or vice versa? Do you have conquest videos? Are you answering those questions, comparing the vehicles? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the second money slide. If you have a sales organization that's giving you excuses for not being top in your market because the other OEM is spending more money, ignore that. You basically have an 80% chance. Listen to me. An 80% chance, if you want to step up, spend a few $1,000s in answering the questions on why they should buy your product over the competition, and get that message in front of them. If you do that, significant changes are going to happen at your dealership. If you rely on the OEM only to convince that shopper, that's the result you're going to get. I don't like that result, especially if I have multi-million-dollar franchise and operating costs saying, I need to sell more Hondas.
And so if you know that shopper is in your market early, and you have early visibility of this around specific make model you're selling, you can tag that shopper. If you reinforce that intent, if you address the questions they have, the tasks they have to sell that car promptly, might you capture that shopper before they get conquest and distracted by some other vendor, or spend time on Craigslist or on the marketplace sites? You only have to move that 20% up by 1% to get a 5% increase in sales. I think that's accomplishable by just understanding and acting on that brand intent, reinforcing it, and making sure you're responding and serving that customer at your dealership. So just a little data to support this. I mentioned some of this earlier. I think this number is low. I'd say it's 35% because this is what we can observe and directly measure in our analytics. If you look at the Compete data around OEM site use and dealer site use, this number could be as high as 60%. But a significant portion, half plus or minus, of your shoppers do visit both Tier 1 sites and Tier 3 sites during their shopping process. And the prior common wisdom was, the brand gets them in market with TV advertising, they go to the OEM site, then they go to the marketplace sites, then they go to the regional site, then they go to the dealer site. No, it's not the way it works. And what we saw, and this is the slide I mentioned from Shopper Sciences. So when they looked at shoppers, on the bottom axis here is the time before sale, moving to the left. And the vertical axis is the relative influence of this particular media. This is done for several media on the buying process. This is a view of the influence that dealer websites have on the shopping process. And frankly, this stunned me when I first saw this about 18 months ago, because I was a believer of that common wisdom, and this said that a month and a half, 2 months on average before the purchase, shoppers were intensely influenced by dealership websites, not at the end of the shopping process, but at the beginning, and then got reinforced and validated by that consumer journey research we did later. So you have access to these shoppers early on. And so our follow-up research has found out that visitor traffic to your website is bidirectional, that we see it's not just flowing downward from the OEM site. Your shoppers are going back from your website back up the OEM site early in the shopper process. 3/4 of those, roughly half the shoppers that visited both tiers, visited both the manufacturer site and your website in the same session, within minutes of each other. What does that tell you about what's the experience that shopper has? That he really looks at the OEM website and the dealer website as complementary and part of the same shopping process, the same experience, getting different information from both sides. And do you think it's valuable to have a consistent experience, having the same offers, on both properties? Is that more likely to reinforce shopper intent than having divergent information, or having an offer in the OEM site that's not reflected on the dealership website? Our answer would be yes, in that I think the proof of the pudding here is, again, with this closed loop analysis, is that this segment of your shoppers, and it's not all your shoppers, but it's a very material portion of your shoppers, close at a rate of 20 to 40% higher than your average website visitor. This is your goal. This should be the foundation of your marketing execution, capturing those brand-aligned shoppers at your store. They close, you're going to have 20 to 40% higher rate. They already have interest and intent from that $8 billion in Tier 1 spend. You have the vehicle. Have this be the base of your business, and then decide where you invest beyond this to conquest other makes and build your dealership brand.
And to kind of bring that home, I remember at NADA last year, there's a gentleman from the Brooklyn or maybe Bronx or something. They sound somewhat alike. And said, Brian, I get all this. There's a lot of competition in New York, but just when they're down those last 2 or 3 days before they make a purchase, how do I make sure I'm in the consideration set? What Cobalt's data is showing is that's not how you should look at it. He should be saying early on, 30, 60 days ago, when that person was in the market, you got to tag them, follow them, whether it's video pre-roll, banner, behavioral, get them into your consideration set. And then, of course, you had mentioned likely reviews, but I told the dealer this. I said, what makes you so sure that 60 days ago that shopper took you out of the market? Meaning the quality of the reviews. They did do some research 60 days ago.
I'd be surprised when Beth? Is Beth here? Hi, Beth. So I'm going to surprise you here. So what does your data show around the likelihood of a visitor to go to a dealership's website based on the different levels of star rating that a dealership has? So, yeah, so it's the people who couldn't hear on the microphone. So roughly, the difference between a 2.5 star review and a 4-star review is about double the traffic. I think of the reviews as the last filter before a shopper gets to your store. And imagine the modest investment you need to make in managing your reputation to get a doubling or a loss of 50%, of the traffic to your store. Reputation management is just essential. It's hygiene. you have to do a good job there.
Absolutely.
So last sort of thoughts here around this, and then we'll talk a little bit about the future, is just we're entering a world where you can wallow in this data. I often wallow in this data and trying to find meaning from it. It's really helpful to just understand the source and the strength and weaknesses of different vendors and the assets they bring to bear. Beware of the common wisdom. More often than not, we've found out the common wisdom is wrong. Third is strive to link these insights to actual business outcomes. The closer you get to an actual sale, connecting shopper behavior to a sale, the more actionable insight you'll have. Too long we've had to get by with crude measures like total number of visits, lead volume, things of this nature. We're getting into a new realm where you can have much more precision about what influences the sale.
And Chris, one thing that we're seeing in general is that lead volume is not increasing. Phone calls seem to be increasing as mobile marketing, right? If you've been doing any mobile marketing, the majority of the leads from AdWords on mobile devices is phone calls, okay? So I love Lisa Murray. Is Lisa Murray in the room? Hi, Lisa. So Lisa and I were talking yesterday in the roundtable. She goes, Brian, we're getting thousands and thousands of visitors to our website, but I'm not getting thousands of phone calls and thousands of leads. How do I go after these people? And I want to tie back that frustration. Does anybody else have that frustration, Brian, to get thousands and thousands of visitors to my website? How come I can't get more leads, contacts, right? You feel that? For the first time, what we're learning is that where the dealership is sitting in that research, how we can keep our brand aware 24/7 as they go through the process. And more importantly, Lisa, those 10,000 visitors are important because now we can look at the VDP views. We can see if that's quality traffic. We can see which sources are driving the most VDP views, reward those choices. Even though we can't contact them, we know if we find the sources that increase the most VDP views at a good cost, we'll sell more cars now. That's profound. So looking at the 10,000 isn't important, but it's looking at the traffic that is looking at VDP views, knowing what that means as far as strategy to sell more cars, and then being present for a long time during the shopping journey. That's what makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, that's probably what Brian has been preaching for a long time, and which we believe as well, is insight by itself is really useless. It's insight turned to action. We're providing this insight for you to act on it, to our customers, but increasingly we're integrating these insights programmatically into our products. Already our advertising platform is acting in ways like Brian identified to present inventory into upstream in your advertising. There are ways in which every single day for every single one of our dealers with our advertising solutions, we optimize their spend across different media and different messaging based on what is working that day, and all done with massive computing technology because it's too much for any human to do. But you still need a combination of human insight, understanding your business, your target audience, but you can supplement that with the power of some technology infrastructure from your partners. So the last, this is just an open conversation about how might this be applied? How might we see digital automotive marketing and advertising change over the next few years? And I'd argue thematically, we're going to see some pretty profound changes. One is, I think, and other people have said this as well, is that our existing paradigm is really centered on this thought that there's a dealer website where you've got a single door to your store, that home page, going to a set of relatively static content. But that paradigm, I think, is rapidly breaking down, and you'll see it, I think, just disappear in the next 1 or 2 years. Our belief is it's fundamentally, the fundamental insight here is it's about the consumer. We are all here, whether an OEM or a dealer, to serve the consumer. If we act on that insight and look at the different kinds of consumers, what tasks are they trying to perform, what patterns are there with those consumers. Some good consumers will be OEM brand aligned. Some will want to buy from your store because of the service they offered you. Some will be looking for, as we heard Amit say, a car at a certain payment level. Some will be looking for certain features and functions. There's a large number, but a finite number of patterns of consumer behavior that can be optimized with these kinds of technologies and insights to maximize conversion, to serve that shopper, so that your online marketing environment isn't one environment with a set of discrete tools. you're designing multi-channel consumer experiences for specific types of shoppers that are dynamically being optimized based on true yields, all the way into closed-loop analysis into your store. So your store, your website, your web presence no longer is one door, but is 4 doors, 8 doors, 12 doors, depending on which consumer experience is optimal for that shopper.
So Chris, let me bring that down. Are you saying we're getting, or we should be able to see the website landing pages that are served based on a display ad, or they customized based on maybe the bucket where that consumer is profiling over those 60-day shopping journey, that we have really morphing, high-converting landing page experience instead of the same landing page experience when they click a banner, regardless of what their shopping behavior
We're at
is?
the cusp of this, and this will be a multi-year journey for us and other vendors to engage in. But yes, we're at the cusp of this. Indeed, some of our dealers will start seeing some of this capabilities next month.
Does cusp mean beta testing that you can't talk about?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm here to translate the politically correct
Andy, keep me
vendor
honest.
speak. Yeah, great. Good, excellent.
So I think that's just thematically what I wanted to share. It's just that I think we've gone through a period of collecting all this information. We're now at a very exciting phase of trying to understand it more and actually take action on it and build that into solutions and present it to you in a way that you can take action on in your stores.
What do you think? We're getting some really good data here. Questions from the audience? Go ahead. Yes, there are. I'm not a deep expert in this area. Actually, Brian, you may be more knowledgeable than this. Mobile is a bit of a challenge due to some of the defaults on the platforms that we're all collectively as an industry trying to punch through. You may have some insights here, Brian. Yeah, so it's funny. Obviously, the true mobile website, the disconnect of like a retargeting banner or something like that doesn't really map well, but I'm finding, I don't know about you, has anybody seen the retargeting banners for this conference anywhere? Have you seen them when you're on your mobile device searching? Remember, some websites just kind of morph down. They're still an HTML site, and they still have the retargeting. So I saw on wonderground.com, which is a weather underground, our DMSC banners taking up 50% of my iPhone. So a little bit depends on the website. We're also finding advertising on mobile apps is unbelievably cheap. I mean, like crazy, 3 cents a click, like crazy numbers. So you just need to talk to your advertising partners on what their, strategy is. Facebook retargeting, for example. Did anybody see our retargeting banners on Facebook? Yeah. You saw them every day, didn't you? Yeah, for a reason. It's cheap and it keeps brand awareness. This is a general message that you have the opportunity. One of the takeaways I got, Chris, is that seeing where that hot spot was, getting consumers tagged early, knowing that they're probably 60 days out, gives me a lot of opportunities to hit them with video pre-roll display, discrete messages, depending on what their behavior is.
And I think philosophically, we're in a world now where we have a 3-screen world, and we have to make sure there's a minimum number of seams between those screens. If you look at like Cobalt.com, for example, that's a responsive design. It responds to a smartphone versus a tablet versus a PC. And that's our philosophy around the website platform as well. There should be one web platform regardless of which mobile device you're using, and that provides a more consistent experience across the different devices.
Chris, as we close, there was a whole research white paper that Cobalt did about the consumer journey. Where can consumers get that?
It's on the screen right now.
Whoa, holy cow, how did that get set up so perfectly like that? Super.
So some of the information I shared today's presentation is not yet in that white paper, in that ebook, but a lot of the core thinking is.
Great. Any questions for the audience before we break for lunch? Questions? Thank you so much for your time. Let's all get together and have some lunch. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Brian.